The streets were quiet, the city lights casting a soft glow over the empty roads. Judge Malcolm Carter, a man of stature and respect, drove his sleek, black Mercedes, heading home after a long day in court. The hum of the engine was soothing, a brief moment of peace in his otherwise demanding life. But that peace was shattered in an instant. Flashing red and blue lights filled his rearview mirror. Malcolm sighed. He had done nothing wrong. His speed was well within the limit. His registration was up to date. Yet here he was, another black man getting pulled over for no reason. He slowed down and pulled to the side of the road. A police cruiser stopped behind him, and a figure emerged. Officer Brad Turner, stocky, mid-40s, the type who carried himself with unchecked authority. As the officer approached, Malcolm rolled down his window. "Evening, officer. Is there a problem?" His voice was calm, controlled. Brad's eyes flickered across the car's expensive interior. His lip curled slightly. "Where'd you steal this car from?" Malcolm's grip on the steering wheel tightened, but his face remained neutral. He had dealt with men like this before. "It's mine," he said simply, reaching for his wallet. Brad's hand shot to his holster. "Don't move." Malcolm froze, his heart pounding, not from fear, but frustration. Brad leaned closer, his expression hardening. "License and registration, now." Malcolm kept his movements slow, deliberate, as he retrieved his ID and handed it over. Brad snatched it from his hand and examined it under his flashlight. His eyes narrowed as he read the name. "Malcolm Carter? That's supposed to mean something to me?" Before Malcolm could respond, Brad stepped back, pressing the button on his radio. "This is Officer Turner. I need backup. Possible stolen vehicle. Suspect may be armed." Malcolm's jaw tightened. Armed? He hadn't even reached for anything. The sound of sirens in the distance made his stomach sink. This wasn't just a stop anymore. This was about to escalate. Brad smirked and leaned into the window. "Step out of the car, now." Before Malcolm could even react, Brad's hand clamped down on his arm. The night had just taken a dangerous turn. Judge Malcolm Carter had spent years building his reputation, a respected federal judge known for his integrity and sharp mind. His presence commanded respect, well-dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, a silver watch glinting under the dim streetlight. Even at this hour, after a grueling day in court, he held himself with quiet confidence. But right now, that meant nothing. Not to Officer Brad Turner. Turner was the kind of cop who saw the world in two colors, black and white. And in his world, black men driving luxury cars were criminals, not judges. His eyes flickered with barely concealed disdain as he stared down at Malcolm. He held Malcolm's ID in his hands, but instead of reading it, he tossed it back into the judge's lap. "That don't tell me where you got this car." His voice dripped with arrogance. Malcolm took a steady breath. It was always the same script. He had seen it in the courtroom countless times. A black man pulled over, treated like a suspect, forced to prove his innocence. "Officer," Malcolm said evenly, "I suggest you take a good look at that ID." Turner chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, so you're one of those, huh? Think you can talk your way out of this?" He leaned against the car, arms crossed. "What are you, a lawyer?" Malcolm exhaled sharply. He knew exactly where this was going. "Something like that," Turner smirked. "Don't make me laugh." Malcolm's fingers tapped lightly on the steering wheel. The tension in the air thickened. He could feel the weight of what was about to happen. He had two choices. Option 1, swallow his pride, play along, and hope this ended without him getting dragged out of his own car. Option 2, let Turner know exactly who he was and watch this man dig his own grave. He chose the latter. "Officer," Malcolm said, voice steady, "you really want to do this?" Turner's expression darkened. He hated being challenged, especially by a black man who refused to bow. "I don't think you understand, boy." He spat the word with venom. "You do what I say, or I make this real simple. Step out now." Malcolm clenched his jaw but stayed still. He knew his rights, knew the law inside and out, but he also knew that didn't always matter. More sirens wailed in the distance. Turner's smirk widened. Backup was almost here, and Malcolm knew exactly what that meant. He sighed, his patience wearing thin. "Last chance, officer." Turner's eyes narrowed. "Last chance? For what?" Malcolm met his gaze, unwavering. "To save yourself from the biggest mistake of your career." The distant wail of sirens grew louder. Multiple cop cars swarmed the street, red and blue lights flashing violently against the darkness. Judge Malcolm Carter remained seated, his hands resting calmly on the steering wheel. He knew what this looked like, a rich black man refusing to step out of his car. That alone was enough to set them off. Officer Brad Turner's smirk widened as the backup arrived. More officers, more power. The lead officer stepped out, a burly man with a hardened face. "What's going on, Turner?" Turner scoffed. "We got a non-compliant suspect. Won't exit the vehicle." Malcolm finally spoke, his voice steady. "I'm not stepping out because you have no legal grounds to detain me." The new officer frowned. "You refusing a lawful order?" Malcolm took a deep breath. "No, I'm refusing an unlawful one." Silence. The other cops shifted, exchanging uneasy glances. Turner's jaw clenched. He hated this. A black man standing his ground, quoting the law like he was in charge. "Enough," Turner snapped. He reached into the car and snatched Malcolm's phone from the dashboard. Crack! With a forceful swing, Turner hurled the phone onto the pavement. It shattered, glass scattering under the streetlights. A few gasps came from the sidewalk. Spectators had begun to gather, some whispering, others lifting their phones to record. Malcolm clenched his jaw. That was an intimidation tactic. Destroy the phone, cut off any chance of recording or calling for help. But they underestimated him. The cameras were already rolling. "Step out of the car." Turner's tone was sharp, almost desperate now. Malcolm exhaled through his nose. He knew where this was going, but he refused to be bullied. "Officer, this is an illegal stop. You are violating my constitutional rights. I suggest you think carefully before—" "Yank!" Before he could finish, Turner's hands shot forward, gripping Malcolm's arm and yanking him out of the car. The world spun. Malcolm's back slammed against the cold metal of his car. Pain shot through his ribs as Turner pinned him hard. Gasps echoed from the growing crowd. Someone yelled, "Yo, what the hell? That's police brutality!" A young woman recorded close by. "I got everything! Keep filming!" Malcolm gritted his teeth. He had fought for justice his whole life. Now he was the one being treated like a criminal. Click! The handcuffs snapped around his wrists, cutting into his skin. Humiliation, rage, frustration. He had ruled over hundreds of cases, delivered justice to people in situations just like this. And now he was living it. Turner leaned in, voice low, taunting. "Not so tough now, huh?" Malcolm's breathing steadied. He wouldn't let this man see his anger, wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, he turned his head slightly, locking eyes with Turner, his voice like steel. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life." For the first time that night, Turner hesitated. The fluorescent lights inside the police station buzzed softly. The air was thick with the scent of sweat, old coffee, and stale paperwork. Judge Malcolm Carter sat in the holding room, his hands cupped in front of him. He was calm, but his mind was sharp, watching, waiting. Across from him, Officer Brad Turner leaned against the desk, arms crossed, grinning like he'd already won. "Let's see you explain yourself now," Turner sneered, grabbing a stack of paperwork. Malcolm remained silent. He didn't need to defend himself. They had already buried themselves. Turner hummed as he scribbled onto a form. Resisting arrest, refusing lawful orders, suspicion of grand theft auto. A younger officer hesitated. Sir, his ID matched the vehicle's registration?" Turner shot him a glare. "Did I ask for your input?" The young cop gulped, stepping back. Malcolm's eyes flicked to the file Turner was assembling. A mountain of false charges. This wasn't just racism. It was a deliberate attempt to ruin his life, to smear his name, tarnish his reputation. Turner smirked again. That robe ain't gonna help you now, Judge. Malcolm finally spoke, his voice controlled, deadly serious. I want my phone call. Turner chuckled. Oh, you'll get it. Right after we're done processing you. Malcolm's expression didn't change. I want it now. Something about his tone made the room shift. It wasn't a request, it was a demand. Turner exhaled sharply, rolling his eyes. Fine, let's see who you can cry to. He nodded to another officer, who handed Malcolm a desk phone. One call, one chance. Malcolm dialed a number by heart. The phone rang once. Then a deep voice answered. This is Chief Reynolds. A beat of silence. Then, Malcolm spoke, his tone low, firm, and unshaken. Reynolds, it's Judge Carter. I'm in your precinct. You need to get here, now. Turner's smirk faltered. Something about the way Malcolm spoke, the authority in his voice, sent a ripple of uncertainty through the room. The younger officer's eyes widened. Wait, did he say Judge Carter? Turner's jaw clenched, but he shook it off, forcing out a laugh. Nice bluff. Nobody's coming to save you. Malcolm simply placed the phone back on the receiver. Then he looked Turner in the eye, his voice cold. You don't understand, do you? I'm not calling for help. I'm calling to end your career. For the first time that night, Turner's confidence cracked. Officer Brad Turner leaned against the desk, arms crossed, smirking. The tension in the room had shifted slightly, but his arrogance remained unshaken. Calling your lawyer won't help, Judge. He spat out the last word mockingly. You're in my station now. Malcolm Carter sat still, his expression unreadable. He had seen men like Turner before, drunk on power, blind to their own downfall. The silence after the phone call was deafening. 10 minutes crawled by, then the door slammed open. Police Chief James Reynolds stormed in, his face pale as a ghost. His eyes scanned the room, locking onto Judge Carter. The room stiffened. Who the hell is responsible for this? Reynolds barked, his voice thunderous. Turner straightened up, but forced a laugh. Chief, we got this guy. Claimed to be a judge, but he resisted arrest, looked suspicious. Slam! Reynolds threw a thick case file onto the desk so hard that it made a loud thud. Papers spilled out, bearing the official seal of the federal court. Do you even know who this man is? Reynolds' voice shook the room. Turner froze. The chief's chest heaved with rage. He gritted his teeth, pointing at Malcolm. This man isn't just a judge. He's a federal judge, you idiot. The younger officer's face drained of color. Turner stammered, suddenly feeling the weight of this situation. But he was acting suspicious. Suspicious? Reynolds snapped. He grabbed a document from the file. This man has been appointed by the president. He has jurisdiction over cases bigger than you can even comprehend. Turner's throat went dry. The room was silent. Malcolm finally stood up. He dusted off his sleeves, adjusted his watch, and let out a slow, controlled sigh. A small smile played at his lips. Well, Officer Turner, he said, voice smooth as silk, looks like you just made the biggest mistake of your career. Turner gulped. For the first time in his life, he felt powerless. The tension in the room was suffocating. Chief Reynolds rubbed his forehead, his face tight with regret. Judge Carter, I am so sorry. This shouldn't have happened. His voice was strained, but he knew it was too late. Malcolm remained composed. Sorry? He repeated, tilting his head slightly. Tell me, Chief, what exactly are you sorry for? The chief swallowed hard, his gaze shifting to Officer Turner, who stood frozen in place. Meanwhile, outside the station, the world was already watching. The video of the illegal stop and brutal arrest had already hit social media. It was spreading like wildfire. News outlets were picking it up. Public outrage was exploding. Malcolm reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and calmly opened a news app. His own face stared back at him, headlines blazing. Federal judge illegally arrested by racist cop. Justice incoming? Officer Turner's face turned ghostly white. The door burst open again. This time, reporters swarmed in. Judge Carter, do you plan to take legal action? Officer Turner, do you have a statement about the racial profiling? Turner stumbled back. His whole body trembled. His career, his life, was crumbling before his eyes. Chief Reynolds stepped forward, jaw clenched. Officer Turner, hand over your badge. Turner's head snapped up. What? Malcolm's voice was quiet but firm. You won't be needing that badge anymore. The words hit like a hammer. Turner's hands shook as he unpinned the badge from his uniform. His entire career, gone. You're suspended indefinitely, pending investigation, Reynolds confirmed, his tone like ice. The officer's knees almost buckled. Malcolm exhaled slowly, watching as justice unfolded in real time. For the first time that night, he finally smiled. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, activists, and the public filled the seats, eager to witness justice. At the defendant's table sat former Officer Brad Turner. His once proud uniform was gone, replaced by a stiff suit and a nervous sweat. His hands were clenched together, his eyes darting around the room. A hush fell over the courtroom as the doors swung open. Judge Malcolm Carter entered, wearing his black robe. Every step he took echoed in the silence. His presence commanded the room. This time he was not a victim. He was the law. Brad swallowed hard, his breath shallow. His world had turned upside down, and now he was on the other side. Malcolm reached his seat and adjusted his robe. He finally looked at Turner. For the first time, Brad saw something in Malcolm's eyes. Power. A smirk played on the judge's lips as he picked up his gavel. He tapped it once. His voice was calm, steady, but filled with unshakable authority. You may now rise, defendant. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Cameras flashed. Turner's face drained of all color. He gripped the table, his body frozen. Would he face jail time? Would justice truly be served? The screen fades to black.